Thanks, Harmony, and good morning, everyone. It's certainly my pleasure to present to you a summary of the company's financial performance and quarterly activities for the 3 months ended 31 March 2023, being our Q3 FY23. I trust all of you on today's call have had a chance to read the announcement as lodged with ASX this morning. I will now provide an overview of the company's third quarter performance and our outlook. I would like, as always, to commence today's call with a brief snapshot on our financials before turning to our operational update. The company closed the quarter in a continued strong financial position with cash and cash equivalents of $23.8 million versus $25.4 million as at Q2 FY23, with overall cash outflows for the quarter of $1.6 million versus Q2 FY23 of $1.9 million. We continue to prudently manage our costs and dedicate the majority of our cash to our important phase 3 clinical trial, IIH Evolve. Cash outflows from operating expenditure included R&D expenditure for the quarter of $1.2 million versus $1.9 million in Q2, which as always reflects the costs associated with the company's contract research organisation managing the phase 3 trial, along with our clinical and regulatory consultants we use, intellectual property costs related to Invex's patent and trademark portfolio, and other ancillary costs associated with running such a large trial. In addition, the company incurred costs associated with our direct R&D staff of $0.21 million, which was flat versus Q2. Admin and corporate costs of $0.19 million were lower versus $0.32 million in Q2 FY23, with this line item including compliance costs associated with being an ASX company, director fees, audit and legals. The interest received on our cash deposits was $0.22 million, which was flat, and the company continues to anticipate cash outflows to increase in subsequent periods. As we further expand site activation, we receive new country-based regulatory approvals, including the recent approval in Australia as announced in Israel, as announced to ASX this morning, and further recruitment for the phase 3 IIH Evolve trial during calendar year 2023. Notwithstanding the increase in cash utilisation, I do remind investors the company is fully funded to complete this trial for Presendin, our proprietary long-acting exenatide formulation, for registration purposes in the EU, UK and Australia from our current cash reserves. Turning now to the company's operating highlights, Invex continued to progress site activation, as you've seen, and secure additional regulatory approvals to expand the global footprint for IIH Evolve in idiopathic intracranial hypertension, IIH. This has been a major focus of the company and its contract research organisation, Premier Research. The number of activated sites as at 31 March 2023 was 9 versus 5 in Q2 FY23. A significant number of new site activations are expected in Q4 of FY23 towards the targeted global number of sites, with 38 clinical sites having now been selected by Invex to participate in the trial following a comprehensive qualification process. And I might add 2 more sites are currently completing their qualifications at present. Site activations are an essential component towards accelerating patient recruitment into this trial. Invex has now implemented a higher level of site engagement to accelerate the process from a qualification to a site activation, that is, contracts. On 19 January 2023, Invex announced the first US site at the Eye Wellness Center in Texas with Dr. Rosa Tang. Dr. Tang is a neuro-ophthalmologist of significant international standing, and we anticipate a total of 10 clinical sites in the US will be activated as part of our trial. As at March 31, Invex had initiated 4 US sites. On 20 March 2023, we were pleased to announce the approval from the BFARM in Germany, which is a competent authority for patients with IIH, and we secured Central Ethics Committee, or CEC, approval for commencement of the IIH trial. Both BFARM and CEC are required to commence a clinical trial in Germany. Up to 5 sites are planned to be activated in Germany. Turning to our outlook, as announced to ASX today, the company received Central Ethics Committee, or CEC, as I mentioned, and State of Israel Ministry of Health approval for patients with IIH in Israel. Invex intends to activate up to 9 clinical sites in Israel, as part of the IAH Evolve Phase 3 trial. This approval came earlier than we had anticipated, which is very pleasing. In addition, Invex expects to receive competent authority clearance and ethics approval to commence the IAH Evolve trial in France during the current quarter, being Q4 FY23. With that, albeit as it's reasonably brief this quarter, I would now like to turn the call over to Harmony for Q&A. Please go ahead, Harmony.
Thank you. If you wish to ask a question, you will need to press the star key followed by the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you wish to cancel your request, please press star 2. If you're on a speakerphone, please pick up the handset to ask your question. Your first question comes from Alan Saran, private investor. Please go ahead.
Hello, I have one question and one comment. The question is, did I understand correctly that you said there would be 9 sites in Israel? Israel is a very small country geographically. I wouldn't have thought it could support so many sites. That's my question. And my comment is regarding the director options. I'd be in favour of those options being renewed when they expire, irrespective of whether they're exercised or not. I think the directors have earned some new options. Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Alan. To tackle your first part of your question first, it is somewhat of a nuance, I guess, in Israel being geographically a small country and from a population perspective, reasonably small. But as I mentioned in the disclosure today, Professor Alex Sinclair, who's our Chief Scientific Officer and Executive Director, has had significant inbound interest from Israeli neuro-ophthalmologists as part of the IAH Evolve. And I guess the 9 clinical sites there more or less represent somewhat of a decentralized treatment pathway for IAH patients in Israel. To give you some context there, in some jurisdictions, there tends to be a sort of a central hospital which has an IAH clinic. For example, Alex's own clinic at the University of Birmingham has a catchment pool, much beyond the city of Birmingham itself. So those 9 sites with the 9 predominantly neuro-ophthalmologists in Israel we planned is really a function of their interest in their pool to be part of the trial. And that's only accreted for the ability to recruit patients in Israel. To your second point, Alan, take that on notice. As investors will be aware, we held our AGM in late November of 2022, where shareholders approved an issue of options to directors, which have been struck at a very significant premium now to the prevailing market price of the securities. Quite clearly, we as a board are very mindful of our current enterprise value, and our ability to grow that enterprise value is going to be a function of building this asset, the asset being long-acting exenatide, Presendin, being our trademark name, by prosecuting this trial effectively and efficiently, and moreover, looking at new applications for Presendin in other indications where the predominant feature of the disorder or the disease is elevated intracranial pressure. And whilst IAH Evolve's been a focus, we also now, given the trial is ongoing, we have a renewed enthusiasm, for want of a better word, to explore more carefully some other options for this exciting asset. But thank you, Alan, for your question.
Thank you. Your next question comes from Richard Cho from Storage Pty Ltd. Please go ahead.
My question just involved, will you ever be releasing recruitment numbers? You're releasing activated site numbers, but yeah, my first question is that.
Yeah, the reason we're not prepared to give recruitment numbers, so bear in mind recruitment has started and patients have been enrolled. It's really a function of the number of sites. So 5 active sites last quarter, up to 9 this quarter. It doesn't provide any metric of a trend over time to provide the running commentary on patients with such a small number of active sites. We feel much better about giving a sustained measure of recruitment when those sites are active and up and running. And as I mentioned on the call and in the release, We have 9 as at 31 March. We're expecting a very significant increase in that number in Q4 of this financial year. That is the reason we don't provide those patient numbers, because it's not a useful proxy on any one particular trend.
Sure. Okay. And the second question is in terms of how you're feeling about the expected recruitment. I think last quarter you kind of mentioned around December 24 might be when you finalise. In terms of, I guess the feeling I'm getting is the site activation is a little bit slower than you were expecting. So would we expect that recruitment to be kind of a little bit later than December 24 now, or are you still kind of that target of December 24?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we have maintained consistently a 24-month recruitment target for IH Evolve. As I mentioned in the release, we've been effectively, I think, as a function of COVID-19 particularly, there's been a time lag between between qualification of sites. As I mentioned, 38 sites qualified, 2 more in the qualification, to getting them activated. And that's just a logistical element, which we've put some resources into to compress that timeline down. So while I would say that the site activations are lagging a little bit, there is this large bolus of activations planned towards that 38, 40 in fact overall target in the coming quarter or so. So when we set that guidance was set on the premise of certain assumptions on patient recruitment and quite obviously certain assumptions on the timing of site activations. And we still feel, irrespective of where we sit today on activations at 9 versus the target of 40, on the assumption that those 40 can close reasonably quickly. So too, we remain confident today that that 24-month recruitment profile is sound. And we built wiggle room into that number, of course, from our own internal modelling on the trial.
So one brief last question is, from site activation to first patient recruitment, do you have any kind of average? Like, is it like a couple of weeks, or could it be months? It just depends on the site. You can't really comment on that?
Yeah, it can. So I guess a good example there is our first site, I think, recruited patients quite quickly, and that was in Adelaide. But she had a number of, I think, newly diagnosed IH patients, effectively ready to go, subject to meeting the inclusion criteria. So you're right, it does depend on the volume of IH patients that present at the particular clinics, but it also depends on whether they pass the inclusion criteria, which is in the screening. And if they do pass that inclusion criteria, they can be enrolled very quickly from there. So each site, when activated, will have drug product available to obviate any logistical challenges, for want of a better word, that a patient presents and screens and is included, but drug product is not immediately available. So the sites all have drug product available for patient selection and, of course, patient use.
Okay, that's all my questions. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you. Once again, if you wish to ask a question, please press star 1 on your telephone. We'll pause for any further questions to register. Thank you. There are no further questions at this time. I'll now hand back to Mr. Duthie for closing remarks.
Thanks, Harmony, and thank you everyone for attending today's call. We certainly, again, as always, look forward to our next update. Stay tuned for competent authority approval from France, and stay tuned, obviously, for how we're progressing with our site activations and our development of Crescendon overall. And thanks again for your support, and we look forward to speaking with you soon.